Hey there. This video is hard to make, so I have a feeling there's something very good in it for me and for other people. If you stick with me, I think you'll find that this might be the best thing you've ever heard in your entire life. Let's go with that. There's a phrase that we often hear that says, "For evil to triumph, the only thing that is necessary is for good men to do nothing." I'm going to push back on that a little bit, because I believe that for evil to triumph, all that is necessary is for good men to not do nothing. We in the West have a very low opinion of the attribute of rest. We don't understand it. We don't practice it. We cannot do what needs to be done. We cannot be who we need to be in the world today by continuing to do more of what we have already been doing. We understand the value of courage. We understand the value of action. I really don't know how to make this video. All right, I think the way to do this is just to start sharing an experience that I had that led me to where I'm at today. When I was 23, I had something like God show up in my life. I was driving down the road in my car, and some presence suddenly was next to me in the car and said, "What do you want?" And realizing at 23 that I was not wise enough to choose something like this that was going to be possibly a limitation for the rest of my life. I didn't want to ask for $1 million and have $1 million become nothing in 20 years, and it has. I took some time to think about it, and for days I felt this presence hovering over my life waiting for an answer, and finally I had the courage to say what I wanted and the humility to realize that whatever I asked for would be a limitation to my future self. This was 25 years ago now that this happened. And I said, I want to be limitless. I want it all. And the response was, then it's going to cost you everything. If you want it all, it's going to cost you everything. That began the process of deconstruction in my life. I started de-accessorizing, letting go of the things that made me feel important or valuable, all of the things in my life that made me who I thought I was. And the way that I went about doing this was by resting. All I did was pull back from the life that I was living just to see what would happen when I stopped. And when I stopped, I realized something invaluable. I realized I was serving my life. My life was not serving me, that I was a collection of tasks and thoughts and identities and labels and pride and shame and all kinds of things that I was consistently working to maintain and keep alive in my life. And the minute that I decided to rest, to truly rest, it all started falling apart. And something else that I realized in that process, and that process is in a way still going on today, is that you can develop a debt of rest. You can develop a deficiency of rest that has to be made up for. Most of us have a deficiency of rest that we need to make right. There's a reason we're supposed to rest once every 7 days. It's easy to get in the habit of letting life become who we are. It's easy to get in the habit of serving the things that are supposed to serve us. But when you take one day every week and you sit down and you be still and you say, I will not do anything of importance or value. I'll feed myself, maybe, although I think it's great to not feed yourself on that day. Not that I practice that, because like I said, I'm really bad at this. It's a matter of establishing ourselves in the present moment and saying, this is my life. It revolves around me. I don't revolve around it. I don't revolve around my job, my tasks, my relationships. I refuse to be a satellite in my own life. I refuse to replace me with my job, my relationship, my tasks, my chores, my obligations. Once a week, we rest. Something interesting happens when I rest. I realize that the aspects of myself that I've been drowning out all week come up and want to be seen and heard. And if I don't rest, those things don't emerge from the depths. They don't get to be seen and heard. And so they stay buried and suppressed and start acting out poorly and influencing my life in a destructive way. We need to slow down, to rest. There's not a lot of people talking about this. I don't know who is. Maybe some Zen masters. But nobody's going to watch my next video after watching this one. Not if they're taking my advice, because they're just going to stop. They're going to stop everything. They're going to sit down. They're going to stop thinking, stop maintaining, wait for everything to slow down, and reestablish themselves in the present moment in their lives, in their birthright, which is the present moment. This is ours. And we rarely spend any time in it because we're doing things and we're being things and we're thinking things. But there is something called right now, and it's waiting for us to come home. It's waiting for us to stop making excuses for why we can't be here, why we can't feel our feelings. It's waiting for us to stop with the excuses. There are parts of us that are waiting to speak. It's important for us to allow the parts of ourselves that we undervalue or that we compartmentalize, that we suppress, to come up and involve themselves in our lives at least once a week. And when I take that time, if I take one day a week to truly rest, what I find is that my next week has a chance of being better than my last week every week. Every week can be better than the one that came before it if I take a day to listen, to be still, to be the center of my own life, and to work on integrating the parts of myself that I've been suppressing. The next week can be more creative. It can be more efficient. It can be more peaceful. It can be more loving. I can see people more clearly for who they are. I can be more patient. Every week can be better than the last if I take one day to sit down and be still. It's normal during rest to feel pain come up, to feel discomfort come up. And that's one of the reasons we should be doing it on a regular basis. And the reason that pain comes up is because being truly present and resting is a powerful experience, even though it seems like weakness to a lot of people, but it's also an intimate experience. And it's a vulnerable experience, because what you end up finding is that you are intimately present with yourself. And for most of us, that means spending time with someone that we don't like, or spending time with parts of ourselves that we don't like. It's an opportunity for the judge and the convict to come back together, to stop being kept apart by distraction and busyness and obligation. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that we're not going to be able to do what needs to be done by continuing to do the things we've been doing and just trying to do more of it. I mentioned that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to not do nothing. We are up against some things that we can't beat if we don't get together. And what I mean by get together is get together within ourselves. If we are a divided house, we are not going to be able to beat what is coming against us. So rest is no longer optional. This is not a luxury. This is an absolute necessity. We have to recollect ourselves. We have to sit down and be still and be present with the parts of ourselves that we do not like and bring them back into relationship. We cannot do what needs to be done in these coming days if we do not get together, if we do not understand how important it is that we ourselves are one. Jesus said that one can put 1,000 to flight. But tell me, how many people are one? How many people are one? Very, very few. A house divided against itself can't stand. And it certainly can't put 1,000 to flight. When we rest, we come back into relationship with the parts of ourselves that need to be heard and experienced and involved. One of the things that I learned when I began resting in my 20s was that performance was no substitute for position. If we do not sit on the thrones of our own lives, it doesn't matter how hard we work. If we are a slave to an agenda, you cannot make up for a lack of position in your own life. You cannot make up for a lack of presentness, of establishing yourself by working harder and being smarter. There is nothing you can do. There is nothing you can do that will make up for a lack of position in your life. If you do not establish yourself as the center, you will not have the power you need to do what needs to be done. You will not understand what it means to be a son of God. You will learn how to be a servant. And that's fine. A lot of people identify with servanthood. And you know what? Maybe a lot of people, that's as far as it goes for them. I don't know. Not okay for me. I will not stop at servitude. I will not stop at being a good servant. I will not stop at being a good child. You're not going to hear me talk about being a child of God or a servant of God very often. I'm not interested in those things, and that's not what I was called to. I was called to sonship. And sonship is position. I am. See, a servant identifies with what that servant accomplishes. It's a task-oriented identity. That's not going to cut it. If you want to be involved in what's coming, that won't do. You're going to have to understand sonship. You're going to have to understand position. You're going to have to rest and sit down and be still and find out who you are when you stop. And let the truth of who you are come to you and be shown to you. Because at first, rest will expose, in some people who have these tendencies or these underlying conditions that are not being brought up to the surface, rest will expose anxiety. It'll expose depression. It'll expose neuroses. And then it'll start exposing beliefs. The hidden beliefs, the beliefs that we're running from. The understanding of ourselves and the world around us that we don't want to face. But if you continue to rest through that discomfort, through that pain, you will be shown the truth. And the truth is better than anything you can possibly imagine. Most of us do not have the emotional bandwidth or intellectual bandwidth to know what the truth is. It's that good. It's really, really good. And then when you find out who you are, now you have a foundation to start from. Now you know your position. You know your divinity. You know your birthright, and you stand in it. And from there, you choose things. From there, you go and you do and you be. But you don't go and do in order to be. These are the things that rest has to offer us. If you're stuck in your life and you're not sure where to go from here, the chances are you need to rest. Because you have probably developed, which most of us do, a rhythm to your life that just keeps beating. And it'll affect everything that you do. It'll affect all of your thoughts, all of your relationships, and maybe it brought you this far, but maybe it can't take you to where you want to go, and you need to rest and let it go. And stop the rhythm to see if there's a different rhythm, a higher rhythm that you want to begin to move from. I'm going to share with you something interesting that I experienced from resting. I realized that I was afraid if I stopped moving, I would stop existing. Isn't that wild? That sounded like a crazy idea until I experienced it for myself. And I realized that down deep someplace, there was a part of me that felt like if I stopped moving, stopped talking, stopped thinking, I would stop existing. And it was partially true. And I worked through that. And actually, I came to the conclusion that, so what? So what? Why would I care to continue to exist? I'm going to die someday. And even if there's nothing after this, and, I've had some pretty convincing experiences that there are, but so what? If I just wash away, okay, that's fine. I won't care when I'm gone, right? And that allowed me to rest in an even deeper way, to let myself stop treading water and just sink in and see what happened. And I would just imagine myself sinking in an ocean deeper and deeper and deeper until I got to the bottom. And I laid on the bottom of the ocean in the dark places where sunlight doesn't reach, and just laid on the bottom of the ocean. And I imagined what it would be like to be down there with strange creatures swimming around and maybe even running into me or touching me or nibbling on my toes, something like that. And I found such an amazing freedom and a deep ability to rest in that when the time was right, I emerged, I resurfaced from that experience. When trying something new like this, letting go of control in a new way in our lives, we don't know what's going to happen if we let go of control. Will we ever resurface from the experience? If I really allow myself to deeply rest, will I ever stop resting, or will I just sit there until I die? And while that might sound like a strange thing to be afraid of, it's real. And what I can tell you is that when it's time to stop resting, you'll know it, and you will do things. It's not a permanent state in the context of you're never going to do anything ever again. If you allow yourself to let go, then you will never do anything again. You will still feed yourself. You will still take care of yourself. And you will do it much better than you're doing it now. But if you've never truly rested, if you've never laid on the bottom of the ocean and just said yes to letting it all go, even if for a day, then you're not going to know that until you try. And once you do, you're going to find it absolutely invaluable. The performance that we commonly engage in is no substitute for position. I know that some of my analogies don't really match up. There's one way that I'm talking about rest as a form of death. There's another way that I'm talking about rest as establishing ourselves in the present moment and saying, I am the center of my life and I refuse to serve the things in my life that are supposed to serve me. And you can trust that if you sit down and if you be still, if you take some deep breaths and you commit to rest, it will show you what type of rest you need. And you can trust yourself with that process. But this is not just for you. The world needs rested people. It needs people who know how to rest. It needs people who regularly say no to the world around them. When we don't rest, we end up getting caught up in this idea that life is a maze that we have to navigate perfectly, that it has these immovable walls, and we have to learn how to turn right and to turn left when we're supposed to. But when we enter a state of rest, we realize that we are creators in this world. We are co-creators in this world. That life is not a maze that we have to navigate perfectly. That we can start to make creative choices that open paths up, that are the right choice because we chose them. We start to realize that it's not necessarily what we choose, but where we choose from that established place in our own lives, from the awareness that we are the stewards of this realm, that we are meant to occupy every aspect of it entirely, that we can be still and know this, that we can be still and know God. When we are in that place, and when we've made the other accessories of our lives submit to our presence, then we find that we can choose really well and creatively. There is a silence available to us through rest that is absolutely deafening. It is earth-shaking. If you are willing to go there, you will find a silence and a stillness that is so at the foundation of creation that you can affect everything downstream of that still and silent place. And everything downstream is everything. There's nothing that's not downstream in our world, in our realm. There's nothing that's not downstream of the stillness and the silence. It is like the primordial formlessness that everything is born out of. Go to that place. Eventually. It took me 7 years of deconstruction and rest to get to where I needed to get so I could begin my life from 23 to 30. And those are very productive years. Those are years of malleability compared to the rest of adulthood. Those are years where growth can happen quickly and we can be flexible. And it took me 7 to get to where I was. I don't expect it to take that long for anybody else from now on. You may experience a depth of rest that took me years to get to, and you may get there in days. I don't know. You may have things to teach me about it. But we cannot afford to take this restlessness with us into the future. We cannot afford to fight from that lesser position of not being established in our own lives and in our own world. We have to start here. And here has to be home. Our birthright, stillness, presentness. We have to silence the voices and start here. The anxiety that tries to stop us from rest is cloaked in a flesh of values, of obligation, of ethics. It manipulates us by talking about obligation and duty and responsibility. It's just anxiety that doesn't want to be exposed. It's depression that doesn't want to be exposed. It's us keeping us from us. It's us keeping ourselves from reunifying, from getting to know the parts of ourselves that we don't want to get to know because they're acting out in strange ways. And we think, oh, well, those parts must be those strange ways. No, they're not. They're just acting strangely. They're just throwing bricks through your window because they're knocking on the door and you're not answering. Don't let the voices tell you that you are obligated to do something that stops you from resting sometimes. And picking one day a week as your hard line for rest. Picking 1 hour a day. That doesn't mean TV. That doesn't mean the things that seem restful but never give you rest. It doesn't mean eating junk food. It doesn't mean numbing out. It means being present, being still. The voices that try to stop you from that think they're helping, but they're not. Think they're doing you a favor. They're not. If you cannot be still, you do not own your life. Life wants to happen through us, and it's waiting for us to meet it right here in the present moment. It's waiting for us to realize that there is nothing to do, there's nowhere to go, and there's no one to be. That we already are everything we've ever wanted to be and more. And because of that, we can rest. What we are capable of is so far beyond what most of us have experienced that we literally cannot imagine it. And it's going to be necessary to become somebody who can do things that we literally cannot imagine and experience things that we cannot imagine if we want to do well in the days that are coming. I don't want to create any more anxiety, but I don't think I'm speaking from a fearful place, so I'm going to go ahead and say this. Most of us have no idea what's coming and what's being prepared against us and what has been prepared against us for a very, very long time. Most of us do not understand how serious our enemies are about taking what we have. It's time for us to prepare for anything and everything. It's time for us to become people who can thrive in any situation. And rest is the path to get there. Don't wait for problems to come up before you decide to start building yourself. Before you decide to rest. Because the problems already are here, and they never stop telling us how important they are. They never stop motivating us with fear and anger and anxiety and separation. They never stop. And because of that, we always feel like there's something more important to be doing right now than resting. And there's not.